Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Marvel Eternals. So, here's the thing. When normally I would go into a Marvel movie and I'm not really sure who the characters are, I usually go out of my way to find some kind of history of them, whether it means a Google search or a YouTube video to watch. Really go in depth and know who every single one of these people are. And because I always like doing that, I like to do my research, I like to go in thoroughly in depth about things. This time around, I could have cared less to do anything of that because really, I had zero interest in seeing this movie in the theater, even when I had the option to go and see it. Really, I was just like, oh, I'll watch it on Disney Plus, I guess, because it's probably going to be popular now it's on Disney Plus, because no one in their right mind would have wanted to go on and really just like, yeah, I really want to go in here to watch the Eternals. A lot of people probably just went and saw this movie simply because there was not much out. Or really there was just like, well, like there's a scarce number of Marvel movies, so I guess we should just go into this one. Hence why when I was offered to go to a theater to see this movie, I was like, no. Because it's like, yeah, there's a scarce number of Marvel movies. Like, I don't care. Like, I can just rewatch old ones. A older one that is to be 10 times better than whatever this thing is going to be. Because really, we have an origin movie that's not really an origin story. It seems like this movie is to mainly focus out of 10 people. There's probably 2 people that they really focus on the most, which is to be Cersei and Kingo. It seems out of everybody, it seems like they mainly have like a whole backstory and a whole thing lined up. I wonder why. Because they're probably going on and really just having this movie be the minority film where every single kind of person is to be put into this film so that way they can try to make a worldwide appeal, because they know for certain that there's no way that this movie is going to make money in one place of the world. Like, hey guys, go on and find that there's some part of the world that's going to love this movie, but that's probably not going to be really just America, because I thought this movie was quite honestly the worst Marvel film that I've ever seen. And if they tie this into the MCU, I'm never going to look back and rewatch this film to remember who any of these people are. I could care less. They should have just chucked these people into a Doctor Strange or a Thor movie, and I still would not have cared. I would not have cared about them. Really, you just have certain things here where like there isn't much of an effort put into this film. Really, just because this movie was only put together because of the Snyder Cut. Because these people, and they obviously make a joke about it in this movie, with the whole Superman reference, now having people ask, like, well, hey, is Marvel and DC, that's the same thing, right? Because I don't know how many times I get asked that when it's a movie that isn't actually a... hey, like, Pinocchio is in Aquaman. Does that mean Marvel and DC are working together? No, they're 2 different companies. And we have it here where it's like the Superman reference. Oh, so is Superman going to show up in one of these movies now? No, it's not. Like, they can reference this stuff, and we just have it to where I think, really, again, the Snyder Cut was to push this to the forefront, to have us being a blatant copy and paste of a Superman, of a Wonder Woman, of a Flash, a female Flash, but a Flash nonetheless. And to give us certain characters that feel very familiar to the Justice League thing, but instead of just having, 7, you now have 10 here, because, of course, unite the 7. but this is to have a group called 10, or numbered 10, whichever. So, really, I don't understand. Also, you have 10 characters in this movie, but they're not completely in this film. I don't know how many people are to just be used here at some point, and then you see them like towards the end of the film. Like, oh, hey, they're still in this film? Like, because we have it to where eventually the band of Eternals is to break up at some point, and then they regroup back together because, like, hey guys, those deviants, they're kind of flaring up, and we have Suri who is to find out a deep down secret that basically the Eternals were all to really just be a waste, because we have it to where the movie keeps iterating how waste of a life of a time of these people are, and that we probably have a number of Eternals that are to all be in a number of different planets. And so again, we go on here to just say, like, yeah, the Eternals are a waste. Really, there is an interesting thing here where we kind of tip the hat again to India in this movie, because of course we have it to where this movie is to be tied from the timeline of obviously Spider-Man Far From Home, where of course Robert Downey Jr. was to go on to an Indian wedding. And so of course in this movie we have to do another nod to India, because of course we do, because it seems that India is to have a massive amount of Marvel fans. So really, that's cool that um, that we got that in this movie. But again, we just have it to where I go in further to just be like, how does any of that part of that scene, how does this help the story? Oh, it doesn't, as well as everything else does not help this story. It's just something fun and cool and cute to do, that I look back on this and I'm just like, man, what a waste of time that this film was. Thank God that I didn't want to go through and sit uh, through this, because I tried to do this last night. I tried to watch this movie last night. I fell asleep several times during this movie, and I was like, there is no way that I can rationally watch this film. Like, I have to watch it when I'm fully awake, and so hence why I have to do this now, simply because I wasn't awake during this film. There is no way to rationally stay awake to watch this movie. I'm sure if I would have watched it in theaters, probably would have fell asleep during then too. So it would have just been like, yeah, I'm never going to really clearly see this movie because I'm going to keep falling asleep during it. So with that said, so we have Marvel's Justice League really here. Uh, a blatant copy and paste of every single one of these characters. Basically, Angelina Jolie is to pretty much be Marvel's variation of Wonder Woman. Icarus is to basically be Marvel's variation of Superman, and so on and so forth. Pick your favorite Justice League member, because you're going to find somebody here who has very vastly similar powers. Uh, it's kind of funny that we have at some point that all these characters do eventually have some kind of popular movie somewhere. For characters like, or for actors like Salma Hayek or possibly Angelina Jolie, like they have quite a few. But then everybody else has kind of like the one thing that they're known for. We have Game of Thrones guys in this movie. We of course have Gilgamesh, who is to be popular from Train to Busan. We of course have Kingo, who of course is to be from Stubers or other kind of things, where actually he is pretty funny in those films. And of course, he has to have such a massive showcasing in this movie compared to everyone else, to where he basically is to holding up so much camera time compared to everyone else, because I guess none of them have a real legitimate personality, or really none of them have anything to really add to this film, as well as nothing is really added in this film regardless. So With that said, let's just go into this movie. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that spoiler time. So let's go into it. Let's just go and talk about this film, and let's get out of the way to say it's. I'm gonna be done with this one because good grief. Uh, this movie is not a movie. It's a mess. There were so many times where we have so many different location changes. I am like, God, I am gonna like there. I don't like. I almost had a point where I was like, I don't think that I can review this film just because it jumps around so much. Like I was thinking like this is like the last duel, where all of a sudden the last duel jumps around through so many time periods. I'm like, there is no way that I can review this movie and be perfect about it because I'm just gonna be like, oh my god, I don't know all the timelines from this film. And I don't know all the jumbled mess of what's going on. I'm so confused. So let's go into it. Let's just go into that double five because it's about that time yet again. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So this movie is to start out at 5000 BC because it really doesn't matter when these Eternals arrive because it's basically just like, well, hey, like we have these deviants that just arrived and they're just being the apex predator that Suri's to mention in her classroom and define us what that actually is. So since the deviants are to arrive and are deciding to just kill all these earthlings off, because we just find out that like these earth beings are just to really just be fed one reason or another to the celestials, and there's going to be an emergent event that is to be coming towards the end of this movie because the world is going to end unless the Eternals figure out a way to stop all this. Sure. Supposedly we had it to where I guess Infinity War was to slow down the whole emergence events, but then eventually once Endgame happened, so I'm like, so wait a minute. No, wait, Far From Home technically is after Endgame, so no, we're set. Yeah, like I was thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, when does Endgame happen and Far From Home? Because basically this is 2024 and it has no real reference of No Way Home, where we're gonna go and do dimension hopping. So yeah, we have these Eternals going and being born onto this ship called Domo, and we have it to where all these guys are just acting dumb because they're just ignorant people that are kind of like blank slated people. So we have this brick of a ship called Domo. It's this big, massive brick in the sky because heaven forbid you do anything cosmetically pleasing with their ship here because it doesn't matter because you don't see it all that often. So who cares, right? So as well as a number of these people. Who cares about them being in this movie 100% of the time? We have 10 people to just dance around with throughout this whole film, and there's certain people that have to be so heavily put in the forefront because they're better actors than some others. So hey, comedian guy? We gotta have comedian guy in this movie more than anybody else because he's comedian guy. Good for him, comedian guy. Anybody else can have jokes? No, because comedian guy. Or whatever. Anyway, so this movie starts off with 5000 BC, so that way we can now tell everybody, once they make it to 2024, that these Eternals have been around for 7,000 years, but they've done jack crap nothing to be involved in the MCU, because all that they give us about is defeating these deviants, and that's all they really do in this film until eventually they have to go on and battle the Celestial, which of course to be a guy named Arashim. Basically, any bit of dialogue that's going in this movie is Could I really have a question for this movie? What the heck is even Kit Harington doing in this film? He does nothing for the movie but to tell us that he's going to have some importance in somewhere later on, which I could care less. I am definitely not going to go out of my way to ever see Eternals 2. Realizing how much of a waste of time this movie was, why would I ever see the sequel of the worst Marvel movie I've ever seen? So, but Kit Harington is playing Dane Whitman, who, of course, to be Suri's love interest, after it seems that both Icarus and Suri are to eventually have such a long relationship between one another that eventually it's like, you know what, I'm getting sick of you. Yeah, me too. Like, let's just kind of like break up because we're just getting sick of one another. But eventually, once it comes time that we have to go and battle out these deviants, because eventually we have it to where the Eternals wipe the deviants out, but then once they come back, we have to get the band back together and have them go after the deviants again, and so on and so forth. So but let's further go on into this movie. So we of course have 5000 BC. The Eternals are to arrive on this ship called Domo Arigato, Mr. Roboto. And so we of course have these caveman-ish like people where we have Suri who gives them this dagger, who we find out is in some artifact thing somewhere plastered on some poster where Suri is to find it years later, which is to supposedly be, I guess, some kind of present day in London somewhere. But just wait, this movie will jump around all over the gosh darn place. So whatever is to be present time, we're going to be jumping down in through any number of like we talk about freaking Hiroshima, the Hiroshima bombs, where you have uh, Fastos that ends up losing faith in humanity to the point of him going on and finding the love of a man to make him realize that he then is to be renewed faith in humanity and decides that he wants to defend humanity because he has a lover with a son. With his son. So we go on here and we have, of course, where speaking of Fastos, we have him at one point in 525 BC, because this movie jumps around again. We have him going on and trying to establish technology for these people, and it seems that he's coming up with a steam engine, and they're like, whoa, that seems way too advanced for these people. So Fastos is just like, well, how about a plow? A plow for farming. Let's just give them that because I guess like that's all we can freaking do. And that is about around the time when they go and they and the team kind of breaks up because reasonably like that's when we start getting to where like deviants are to no longer be or no wait no 1521 CE is when the team disbands. My bad. Heaven forbid I know parts of this movie because there's so much to talk about. But anyways, so let's go into what I was saying before. So Suri was to go on and be this teacher, and she was going on and talking to her students about the apex predator. That really this is just to be a foreshadowing thing for when she is to go and meet the Celestial and go and talk about the same exact thing. We end up having at some point that there is an earthquake being taken place on uh, like during this classroom, which kind of forces now Suri to act upon this earthquake because there is a deviant that is attacking the city. So we have this deviant that is to weirdly have this healing factor, and everybody's kind of a little baffled about that because they're like, wait a minute, deviants don't usually have our powers. And so we have Cersei, we have Sprite, and we have Pepsi, and we have Icarus going on and trying to fight out this deviant in London. And so we go on and have them try to fight this out to really just have Sprite using her power to duplicate herself and Cersei numerous times over for the deviant to try to figure out where exactly they are, but the deviant can track them anyways. We have it at one point that Sprite is kind of like the mystique of this group, where it seems like she is to be able to change her looks to be a much more older person or something along those lines. There's at one point where there's a bar scene where all of a sudden we have a guy who's kind of putting his hand through this other girl's hand because she's not really there because she's Sprite or Pepsi or Coke, whatever company that Sprite is actually from. No sponsorship for this movie, I guess, for Sprite, but like you would have thought that would have probably been her favorite drink. So, so we of course go on. And we have Icarus going on and blasting through the with his laser vision. I want to say heat vision, but that seems like a Superman thing because Superman and Icarus are one and the same, right? Because Icarus has a cape, right? No. Does it matter? Not really. So, so we have it to where they go on and battle this deviant to realize it has a healing factor. And so really at this point, instead of having to fight this thing, they're just thinking like, hey, let's get the heck out of here because this thing has a healing factor and we've never seen that before. So this is going to be way difficult to take this thing down. So we go on and we have a number of characters that, of course, we have Kit Harington here kind of rattling on about. The one guy who, of course, was to walk too close to the sun, and we'll eventually figure out why that is to be referenced here. Dane Whitman, who is eventually going to, I guess, be the Black Knight here. In end credits. So this guy is a waste of life. Really just be this romantic entanglement with Suri, but he does nothing. We end up having at some point where Dane Whitman is to tell us that at some point in this movie that his family does have some kind of like history about him, but we really don't find out what that is until end credit scene. So what a waste of time that was. So we unfortunately find out at some point in this movie that Ajax is dead. Hence why these guys are to be able to have this healing factor for this deviant. And I'm going and rambling all over the place. I realize that, but this movie is to also be rambling all over the place. So I feel equal to this movie's just blatant all over the placeness. So they go on and they find that Ajax is dead, just for them to find Ajax again somewhere in this movie, where all of a sudden Icarus is now talking to Ajax about how they knew all along that the world was going to end, and they knew the game plan better than everyone else did, and that forcibly we have Icarus towards the end of this movie now fighting against all of his Eternals, basically saying how, like, hey, don't go up against the Celestial, don't fight against him, and really just go on and just accept that the world is going to end. Because it really doesn't matter anyways, because everyone's life of all these Eternals are a blatant lie anyways. So it's cool. Just be okay that this world is going to end. Be cool with it. Because all these characters are to have a complete waste of story anyways. So we go on in this movie, and we, of course, are to eventually have Fastos... Fastos, the technology guy, if he hasn't made a plow in this movie, he's to also go and lose his faith in humanity, and because of the whole Hiroshima incident. But he then regains with, I don't know if I mentioned all that already. I probably already did. So I probably already said all of that. So we go on and we have this group who is to all get together, and so they're re-putting the team back together, and so they're going and finding Kingo, who we find out is to be this heavily accomplished movie star who is to be basically stealing and doing a movie where he is to basically be Icarus in some Indian film or some Bollywood film where we end up having this big massive dance number where really we just go on and have Kingo mentioning that he is like doing all of these movies, and that at some point we have him showcasing that he has lived forever, but he has just said that every single one of his eventual past movies was all from his father and his grandfather and his great great grandfather and whatever. So that way people don't assess anything, realize that this is to have been the same guy this whole time. So we go on and we have Kingo with his assistant that is to go on and record everything that's going on here, because Kingo is to want to just have a biography being done, or just some kind of footage done being with the Eternals, to where we kind of have these backstories or we get to know certain characters. So we go on and have all these characters who are to eventually go on and I forgot about the 400 CE wedding that I guess was done during the Gupta period, where we of course have our character who I believe is Duga. Heaven forbid I know all these names. Druga, who eventually is to have a fight breaking out in one bar, and he is to control everybody to stop the bar, or stop the bar fight. And so we have Druga that is to all of a sudden go off and do his own thing. Because at some point we just have Druga who more and more wants to just control all of humanity, to force them to live in peace, and because he has that ability to just control everybody. Basically, this is Charles Xavier, with the exclusion of him being way more powerful. So, if we not only get some Justice League members in here, now we also get some X-Men, basically, in this film. So there's nothing about this that feels all that like, oh wow, this feels like an original power that this person has. Oh, this feels like original character with a unique power set, because I think at this point everything has basically been done here. So it doesn't feel like we need to really go off and really recreate a new power or an interesting thing for any. We can just recycle a bunch of at this point. So so we go on and we of course have Gilgamesh and Athena, that is to go and rejoin this group. We have Gilgamesh, who is to be transformed into this big massive baby, and we have Kingo, who is drinking this one cup, referencing that him and Thor used to be really good friends, but I guess he doesn't text him anymore. And we of course have also someone else is kind of referencing the Thanos event, and we just have it to where there's so many Marvel references of these characters being forced to be tied to something, but where does any of this really go? So Kingo is eating this corn drink, where we find out that Gilgamesh was to go and chew this thing of corn with his own teeth, and that we have Kingo that spits this out consistently, to where Kingo is to now tell Gilgamesh, can you stop having this drink out here, because I know like this is a drink of like the real origins of it is god awful. So we go on here and we end up finding out that Athena, or the goddess of war, because I guess Ares is just busy. It's a joke. I just saw Wonder Woman because this is basically Wonder Woman here. So we go on and have Athena, who is to basically just battle off at some times with the deviants, but then she's also to fight against her own team because they have nothing better to do with all of these characters. So Athena is to possibly was supposedly to get reset, and they're like, no, like if she goes on and gets reset, she'll forget everything. So like we're just gonna keep her here and consistently have her like battle all of her team members just so that way we can just selfishly keep this woman alive. And there is consistent times where she is just battling certain members of this team to where eventually when Athena is fighting Icarus at the end of this movie, it's like, oh, okay, well, definitely send her out because she's going to battle with all the other Eternals anyway. So, like, either by choice or whatever, like, go ahead and have her fight him. Obviously, that seems to be the perfect choice here. So, because we have Athena, who is to just be this conjurer of weapons, where she kind of conjures these weapons seemingly out of nowhere. And because really, heaven forbid you research any number of these characters, right? That's on me. So, excuse me for burping there, because this is a movie that it is, of which. So, weirdly enough, we have supposedly Eric Brooks's Blade voice being used somewhere in this film. So basically, they're saying at some point that Blade is going to be used somewhere, but definitely not in this movie because his voice is just to be used. So I'm a little weirded out by that. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to rewatch this movie again just to figure out where Blade's voice is being used because I could care less. So, speaking of waste, we eventually find since Ajax is dead that Suri is to be the new leader of Eternals. Everybody is thinking it's like, well, shouldn't it be Icarus because he's the strongest out of this group? And we have it to where it's like, no, like Suri is to be the one chosen because she, of course, is to have the celestial communication sphere that kind of pops out of her chest. That she is to be able to go on and talk to the celestial that is basically going to break down to her that it's a waste for her and everybody to have been a part of this whole them being sent here going against the deviants because really this whole thing was to just be this one big massive suicide mission that these Eternals were never going to win, or neither were the deviants. It was basically just like, well, let's just keep having this battle go on and on and on until the Celestials just get tired of it and decide to just reset the whole planet Earth. So we go on here and we have it to where Suri is to tell everybody the truth. And so once they go on and do that, they now have to decide to go and fight their own Celestial, who is to be Sherahem, or Arishem. And so they go on and they fight Arishem simply by combining all of their powers together because they find out that the deviants are going and siphoning off the Eternals' powers. So they're like, well, hey, why can't we combine our powers to make this kind of unimind or make this brainstorm and go up against, of course, this this, of course, what is it called? The Risham, anyways. Like, how about we go and combine all our powers together and Voltron this up or Power Rangers this up into a big massive Zord of Unimind and take down the Celestial. And so we have Icarus and we have Ajax kind of fighting against that, to where Icarus is go and kill off Ajax for the second time to just feed her off to these deviants and have Ajax go and kind of shotgun some of these deviants. But what is she going to do? She's just the healer of the group. So, what power can this girl have? So, because it seems that there had been where Ajax had been kind of hanging her hat at, we find out that there had been a number of deviants that they didn't ever want to go on and take down because they're like, hey, what's the point? Like, if anything, let's just kind of keep these deviants here because, like, we're just going to keep battling on and on and on. It's a waste. So we go on and we have the... At one point, we have the deviants that are going on and continuing to kill these Eternals, and they start to get their own kind of mind of their own, and they're starting to realize, like, what is really going on here. Like, the deviants are starting to realize what the Eternals are starting to realize, and they're like, oh, so this is, like, us fighting is still, like, a waste. So we have the group combine their powers together. We have Stanos, who goes and takes on Icarus, and... Fastos, who goes on and takes down Icarus, and is to use this thing to chain Icarus to the ground. And so we then have the powers combined of the Eternals to then have Cersei go on and take down this Celestial, and all that we see is just this Celestial that is to be weirdly coming from the earth, and his, like, hand is coming from the earth, and his head is coming from the earth, saying that this Celestial is to seemingly be dead. So we couldn't even get a big, massive battle. They just have to, like, toss this to us the way that they do. And so we go on here, and we have thinking the Celestial is dead. But then all of a sudden the Celestial just comes on back and he's like, hey guys, like, and he just, like, grabs, like, Suri and is to mention, it's like, well, hey guys, like, what you all did was wrong. And so, like, at some point you are going to receive your punishment by going up against your Celestial and blah, 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 blah. So really just the end credit scene is for us to have Star Fox come in here with Pip the Troll and is to announce his presence to the Eternals. And I'm like, what a waste, Harry Styles, or whatever this guy's name was. So, and we also have the end credit scene where we have Harington find out that he's going to become the Black Knight here, the Marvel's Black Knight. Because he has this sword, so he's eventually going to become the Marvel's Black Knight, maybe in an Eternals 2, which no one will care about after this movie is to be put out, and everyone is to see it, and no one is to care. 2.5 hours that I broke down into 40 minutes. That seems kind of odd, because I really severely rushed through this film, because there is nothing really going on. Because really, it's all just the Eternals fighting the Deviant. And we also have it to where there's points in time where we have, of course, like certain characters that just don't... Like, it's sad that we have kind of Makari, who is to kind of, like, being, like, injected in here barely in this film. And there's a lot of points and times where I'm like, I don't care for this character. Like, she's not in here used enough. She's not focused in here enough. and it just kind of comes down to everything else. We had some kind of interesting stuff with Droog, who's to go on and use certain people and of this one town, and all these certain people are to all have shotguns, and they're blasting onto the deviant, and I thought that scene was cool. I also thought that it was interesting that Cersei was to go and take some deviant and turn it into a tree, and they're like, "Oh my god, that is amazing! How could you have done that?" To where them realizing she could do that forces them to just say, it's like, well, like you're gonna have to do like combine your power into the unimind to then take out the celestial, because like you evidently have some power now to change this celestial into something else, because that's all that she can do. We have at one point where like Suri is to turn a tree into water, like a part of the tree, and have the tree knocked over, and then she changes the tree into a metal tree towards heavy, and like this deviant is kind of like scraping away out from under this tree, while Droog is to have all these people like start firing in on it. We have Kingo here that goes on and is to kind of like do this one like slide and use his gun fingers as really that's what seems to be what he does here. These gun fingers with this energy blast gun fingers that he basically does in this movie. To go on and he blasts one of these deviants in the head, and we of course have Kingo screaming to his assistant like, "Hey, did you catch that?" And he's like, "Yes, sir, I did." Because we had Kingo's assistant that had a number of all these cameras, and every single time any one of the Eternals are to break one of these cameras, all of a sudden we end up finding that this guy weirdly just has another camera. Where all of a sudden Sprite is like, "How is it that you have all these cameras?" Because I guess like they figured that they'd run out of cameras, but no, this guy just consistently keeps popping out cameras for whatever goofy reason as comedic relief. So we also have towards the end of this movie that Cersei is to make Sprite a human, because Spritesy wants that ability to become human, and so she does. But now she actually has to live her age, which means she now has to go to school. And of course, we have Kingo mentioning that. Oh, like, oh, you have to go to school now because you have to live your age and eventually die off. At some points in time, this movie does kind of feel like The Old Guard, or does kind of feel like Hancock, the Will Smith movie. And so, really, when looking at this film, like, this movie doesn't feel at all original. Depending on when the comic book of Eternals did come out, which again, I'm wildly surprised why Marvel would dust this out to do this movie, Snyder Cut. But it's the only reason justifying in my head why they would do this movie. Because how could they say that this movie is like, oh yeah, this movie's going to be a way massive hit? Why? These people don't even have like cool enough costumes for people to give a about. Like, these are to be the goofiest looking costumes for these characters. And I am just like, man, they had just wasted their money on this movie. Uh, but when really looking at it, I'm sure people are just going to go and watch this movie anyways and just make it a part of their MCU tossing of whatever, because of the references that are to be put in here, and that's about it. So, with that said, oh, Karan is of course Kango's assistant. I know, I didn't want to like offend anybody to say like, hey, you came up with all these other people's names, but not that guy who's kind of in a bulk of this film. I don't know. There was just several things where I just really just this movie. So yeah, with that said, I think that's all I'm going to talk about for this one. Uh, I don't really care about any of the relationship stuff between Icarus and Suri. We had at the end of this movie where after Icarus is to realize that they are to kill the Celestial here, we had Icarus going on and flying right into the sun, killing himself off. And I'm like, well, that's a character that seemed more interesting than anybody else. That we spent so much time to get to know this character compared to everyone else. Just to have him fly into the sun, which is a massive waste of time. But I'm assuming at some point that Icarus is probably just going to be just resetted and brought back to life again. So we're just gonna have this character come back probably at some point. Probably a very different Icarus, but an Icarus nonetheless. So yeah, because I wanted to talk about that because I'm sure a lot of people are like, hey, you forgot how Icarus dies in this movie. Just flies right into the sun because I mentioned the reference of it, but I didn't go on and whatever. So, so yeah, at the end of this, we have really just Fastos going and complaining about all these Eternals being at his house, and Athena is to go and use a weapon to get down some orange because this kid is to desperately want one. And I'm like, man, this is really how we're ending this movie. With this, just like, oh, you've lost your babysitting privileges, and oh, like, when are you guys gonna get out of here? Because violence solves nothing, son. Violence solves nothing. What are we? Why do we? This movie. That's what I feel about this film. This movie is boatload of so I'm sure there's a huge, massive amount of details that I couldn't have been bothered to say about this film compared to everything else. Everything about this film was how quickly can I get this review over, because I don't think if anybody's to heavily want details about this movie, really you should really just go on and have a person that really took that time, because I am just not interested in taking the time for this film. This is like, no one should see this film. No one should ever watch this film. Uh, so justifying my watching of this film makes no sense. And plus, also, I don't want to put the kind of effort that I would normally put in a normal review for this film, because there was nothing about this film that was to really like. I was so glued to this one, but everything coming out of this movie was wah 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 wah. It was Charlie Brown throughout this whole entire film, and really there was a lot of like interesting visuals. There's a lot of history going on in this movie, but other than that, there was nothing else really coming out of this that I could have really just wanted to repeat out of my mouth. And maybe at the end of the day, they're going to go on and use these Eternals in a much more beneficial manner, which is to force us to all say, well, I guess I should have watched that Eternals film because now I don't know who any of these people are. If these people are to be used in any other movie, I would have probably gone on to that film like, well, I guess I don't need to see the Eternals film still because they're just inserted in here. And I'm sure they're going to have to tell us their whole entire backstory in some other movie because no one could have cared. So this movie is to go down, and I'm not quite sure, like, thinking of it now, I probably also complained about Ant-Man and the Wasp. And so I'm kind of not sure if, like, I don't know if Ant-Man and the Wasp could be worse than Eternals. I would have to rewatch Ant-Man and the Wasp recently to see how bad that movie was. But I think that movie technically has a story that I can rationally... no. I can't rationally get behind the story, but I could just be like, oh, this movie's fun! Funner than this film. At least it had one cohesive story, where this is a jumbled mess of all over the place. So yeah, this Eternals movie, if they were going to do a series, this should have been a series, not a movie. They made a mistake by doing a movie instead of a show. This would have been the perfect thing to do a show and not a movie. But big mistake on their factor for thinking that they can make a movie out of this. This movie makes me want to go and watch the Inhumans show to just go like, man, like I think the Inhumans show is going to be like as good as this movie. So it's kind of making me think about going and watching the Inhumans at some point. Maybe I'll do that soon because I want to see if the Inhumans show is all that popular. Maybe I'll just slap a tag on here to just say, oh yeah, Eternals and Inhumans, same thing, right? Just to see if it's popular. I'm interested. So I'm going to get out of here. There's nothing justifiably that I could say worse about this film or even just detail this movie more. I think I spent more than enough time just wasting my time talking about this film. Because to me, this one was a waste. Because I don't think I was really ever wanting to see this movie. It's really like this is the sad point where I'm just like, well, maybe people want to know the opinion about what I have for this film, so they're probably gonna view this video, and I don't like that. I don't like it at all. But there's probably not gonna be a massive amount of people that aren't gonna just go into this thing to just do a video on the Easter eggs of it and not anything else. It's kind of like the Black Widow movie, where it was a more of a Easter egg thing for the references and whatever of that film than anything else. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. The least amount of detail that I've done in a movie in a while, but I was never going to really watch this film. And so really that's my thing here, is I was never going to watch this film. And so putting this review out like I did was simply because I had no interest ever watching this film, and it's like, well, just put something out anyways. That's really what it comes down to. Just put this out anyways. Just put it out the way you're gonna put it out. So if you guys are interested in any other Marvel things, check out a video that I'd probably put a lot more effort in, or roughly about the same, because yeah. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. One last thing. Completely forgot. Gilgamesh had died in this movie. So about like how many people died in this film? So in recapping, Ajax died. Really from Icarus. Gilgamesh died while having both Athena and Gilgamesh having this moment where Athena was to start to lose control and start to battle against her team yet again during another deviant fight. And eventually Gilgamesh died while the deviant was to take his power and all of a sudden become this kind of much more smarter deviant. So and Sprite was to become a human. Really, other than that, and so Icarus was to go into the sun, and he was to die. So yeah, that kind of covers all the deaths. So there we go. Woohoo! Yeah, that's it. That's all that I wanted to say. So I'm gonna have to fuse this clip together just to talk about Gilgamesh's death, really, because it's the only thing that I really left to talk about. There isn't much of me wanting there isn't much of me wanting to go into further in detail about this film. So I'm sorry if I wasn't in much detail. I think really this is probably how I should do reviews actually, and not have to research and take the time to do it. Simply because of how like justifying like I shouldn't have been heavily in depth of a number of things. But it's also interesting for me to do that kind of stuff. So with that said, bye everybody. Bye, everybody.